Endless Evolution is a community engaged in the exploration of human experience. We engage with one another to understand our unique paths. We talk, we laugh, we heal, and we invite others to share this journey with us. Won't you join us? Endless Evolution.
So many humans, and where's the humanity?
Hey, all. How are we doing today?
Oh man, we are here. We we are here. We are here, and
Yes.
I'm feeling good in the moment. I'm feeling
Geez,
good in this
Spence, I
moment.
thought
I was
maybe
thinking
Absolutely.
about
for Month you were gonna say we are here and we are queer. No,
we.
no.
Hey, we're all that too.
Right, right.
We are all that and nothing at all. We're all that, So yes,
All right. Well,
yeah.
welcome back everyone to our podcast, Endless Evolution. Love that you're joining us. Want to remind you to like, subscribe, follow us wherever you're listening to your podcast, whether that be Spotify or YouTube or Apple Podcasts. We love to interact with our audience. So the more that you follow us and comment, the more that we're able to get your voice included into the show. So today we're excited because we're going to be talking about, all that's going on in the world right now is very heavy. There's a lot internally as well as externally happening with the United States as at the epicenter of most of it, and it's taking tolls on our lives personally, and not just for ourselves, but really how we interact with others. And so today, with our invited guest Matthew Cross, who Spence is going to introduce in just a moment, we're going to dig into when the political and personal realms of our worlds kind of interact and how we can process all of those interactions and hopefully, emerge from those interactions with a sense of evolution, with a sense of hope for something that will evolve out of humanity coming together. And so we're here for that dialogue and hope that you all today can gather some insights for yourselves, but also, as always, if you have something you want to add, you can leave a comment or you can call us and leave a message at www.speakpipe.com/endless evolution. And we'd love to hear from you. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to throw it over to Spencer and we're going to get the show started.
All right, all right. Thank you all for being here and for listening in. If you're listening, well, you're not listening live, but you will listen to the recording. So thank you for doing that. It's good to be with all of you all today. As I said, even before we started the recording, to be with you all is real special to know that we all hold community together. So it means a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to you all as well. And so just wanted to affirm that. I am just so grateful to have my friend, dear friend and brother Matthew Cross on today. I know he's not a formal guy, and neither am I, but I certainly want to introduce him and say a little bit about him. He is a dear friend of mine. He was in Erica and my wedding 15 years ago. We are dear friends. He and his wife Adela and his just adorable daughter Nona. Um, and so we have always, Matthew, when I think about it, had these kind of conversations. Even 15 years ago, 16 years ago, we were sitting around the table with friends having conversations like this, and so we kind of gelled together on these issues of humanity and things like that. And I just want to say that I have to say this too. Amongst everything I'm about to read about Matt, he's a very funny guy too. He's very funny.
Well, we love to laugh, so
We
bring it
love to laugh,
on.
and I'm telling you, he is very funny, which really endears me to him as well. And so, Matthew, welcome to the show. Let me read a little bit about you, and then I want you to go ahead and talk a little bit about yourself and what you do and why it's relevant for now, relevant for the times, and everything like that, and talk about that a little bit. Anything you want to say. So Matthew is a professor of political science at Macomb Community College. He's been there for a long time. Head of the political science department on one of the campuses there. He's got a BA in history from Oakland University, also a master's in political science Concentration in American Government and Politics from Wayne State University. I believe that's in 2005, right, Matthew, when that happened. And so I believe, Matthew, have you written a book? Are you an author? Have you written a book as well, I think?
I have written the textbook that my students use for their Introduction to Politics class.
Okay, very good. I thought that was on there. Well, thank you for that. So, welcome to the show, Matthew Cross. Your presence really blesses us today. And so, listen, I'm gonna turn it over to you because we'll start some questions and just start some conversation. Um, what you do and talk a little bit about the journey first of how you've been at Macomb Community College and how you got in there, what it means to you, and how it's evolving.
Well, I want to first reflect back how grateful I am to be here and to share this space with all of you and to learn from one another. And just thank you so much. I'm very grateful to be here. I started at Macomb in pretty soon after I got my master's degree, actually, and as an adjunct, and then later a part-time or a full-time position opened up, and I was able to take that. And in a moment of kind of raw honesty, I think the reason that teaching attracted me at first was because one, I was kind of tired of not working or working part-time and making nothing, and a
Right.
full-time teaching gig sounded great, right? The second thing was I loved talking about politics and government and the associated fields. And there was a bit of me that loved the idea that as a teacher, I would be the center of attention and I would
Mm,
command the space and the room, and all of these students would therefore be blessed with my wisdom. And we all start someplace, and unfortunately, that was where I was starting,
right.
and I got over that relatively quickly, thankfully. And part of the reason I got over it was because I started working with and studying with this community of other teachers who were primarily K through 12. And they were, working on like, here's my lesson plan for this, and here's this, and this is what I'm trying to do here. And they'd all bring this stuff in. And when I saw what they were doing, I just was like, I'm lecturing for an hour and a half because that's what was done to me. And I thought
Mm,
that's what teaching was. And now I'm seeing all you folks, and what you're doing is like, I got to learn this, So I was immediately really humbled. And that journey of actually how to be a decent teacher kind of then took off for
yeah,
me.
yeah.
So thankfully, I'm a much different teacher now than I was when I first started. And that's been that. And it's teaching political science. It's always funny because whenever, you tell somebody that you teach political science, there's two responses. One is like, I don't want to say nothing about that anymore. Let's talk about something else, right?
Right.
Or there's kind of a pause, and there's always like, wow, must be a really interesting time to teach that class.
Mm,
And they're right, and they've always been right, no matter when they've said it, right? Because there's always something happening. There's
yeah,
always something that makes that an interesting subject, a
yeah,
relevant subject. And so I felt really, not that other subjects that feel maybe a little more, I don't know if static is the right word, but the joke is, well, in math, 2 plus 2 is always 4, right?
right.
With politics, things keep shifting, things keep changing. You know, police powers used to mean this, but now they mean something different because of the Supreme Court decision on whatever, right? And moving on. So that is, that makes it a continually evolving subject to teach, as well as because the world in which the students exist continues to evolve, and I continue to evolve. So it's, it's sort of like the saying, you never put your foot in the same river twice, because the river has changed and so have you, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm very much aware, I think, now of that aspect of it. And um, it remains the best job I've ever had,
Yeah.
and something that's really challenging. And I like both aspects of that. Like, I love the work, I love um, the content, the subject that I teach. And I also love how I'm constantly having to update and
Hmm.
rethink and reimagine what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Well, apparently, Matthew, you're very good at it now because I had a chance to go on Google and look at rate my professors. And all the ones I read were like 5 stars.
Oh my.
You know what I mean? Yeah, they were 5 stars. Like, he's engaging, he's this, he's all that, and I'm sure that's part of that evolvement. But I just smile reading them because I know you personally, and so that really means a lot for us as educators. You know what I mean? The best compliment I think we can get is from students. About what effect we had on their lives, and these are students who are like, "Hey, I would take it again." And students who didn't have to take the course, right? They weren't required to take the course, even said that and they would take it again. So kudos to you and your involvement in that. So I'm gonna get in. We talked a little bit about what's happening now, what's going on. We can probably talk about that for hours, but I certainly want to hear about when everything is evolving, like you said. How do you interpret now? How would you interpret what's going on now from a political perspective or historical perspective? Since this is your field, have you seen things come back around? You know how they say, there's nothing new under the sun. What we see is coming back around. Is it different now? What do you see different? How do you interpret it politically? And if students were in your class, and what words can you give to that?
What I try to emphasize, and I don't know if you all were, I think you were talking about, and I don't remember who said it before, but Naomi, you were saying that a colleague or a friend of yours is saying that they're so bogged down in current events, right?
Yep. It's just they can't go beyond the headlines, right? Because it's
Yeah.
just too much for
Hmm.
them. Mhm.
And for me, I generally try my best to stay away from the headlines. Sometimes I
Hmm.
have to focus on that. But what I'm generally trying to do is, I'm a big one for, I feel like in politics, everything is presented as if it's in its own silo.
Hmm.
Like, political news or politics is this blizzard of apparently disparate, isolated facts that make it very difficult for us to keep track of what's going on. We just get exhausted. I mean, I'm constantly like, someone is posting on social media, "Hey, do you remember this when this senator was blah blah blah?" And I'm like,
Hmm.
"Oh man, I totally forgot about that guy." And
Yeah.
that was a huge story for like 3 weeks or whatever. And I think, and students seem to, this seems to resonate with students, but for me, my emphasis has always been on, it is critical for us, if we're going to get a handle on any of this, to understand how everything is connected, and to understand also, to take the long view, to have the long memory, right? That, for example, when you understand the tensions and the contradictions, the material conditions of the drafting of the US Constitution, right? When those folks were locked up in that room, what did they have to say about poor people? What did they have to say about democracy? What did they have to say about property, and so on? To identify the connections between that and what's happening now, or what
Hmm.
happened 50 years ago, if I were teaching 50 years ago, right? And to take that long view and to see the political world as something that we can understand if only we had a decent map, And I think that's the struggle for so many of us is we don't have a map. And maps can show many different things, right? Um, whatever their emphasis is. But I think if you have a good detailed map, it makes it much easier to process these things. So, we have now the announcement, yesterday, was it yesterday about, or was it this morning
Yeah.
about, the US attacking, those nuclear facilities in Iran. And a lot of folks are with longer memories are recalling, of course, the justifications that the Bush administration gave for going to war in Iraq or Afghanistan or backing up Clinton under the Clinton administration going into Kosovo and Iraq. A lot of the same countries come up again and again, and so on. And Lyndon Johnson with Vietnam and the reasons given for that and so on. And I think for me, I tend to avoid the day to day, what's exploding on Twitter or whatever the hell they call it now, and what's happening here. And instead, like, can you understand all of this from a larger perspective and as part of a cohesive, connected phenomenon rather than just a bunch of individual things that we can't keep track of?
Yeah. Yeah.
I, I think it's fascinating. I'm sorry, just jump in here, Spence.
Yeah. Yeah. Please do.
I think it's fascinating that you use the analogy of a map. And the first thing that came to my mind is, we all grew up in the United States. I'm assuming we all grew up in the United States. We grew up in the United States, and the center of every map that we learned is North America, right? And we very frequently don't pay attention to the other continents or, how they are emphasized or not emphasized, what their sizes are. Like the largest continent is Africa, and by far they shrink the continent to make it almost the same size as the other continents. And so when I was in Japan some time ago, they had done the same thing that we had done, but centralizing Japan as the central the central country of the world. And so when you mentioned this idea of bringing a map, the first thing I thought of was like, yes, and from whose perspective? Who gets to emphasize and centralize their perspective when you're looking at a map versus looking at the total map and the actuality of size and the number of people and the number of ethnic groups and the number of so on and so forth, natural resources, all of the things that maybe a map can, the topography, the weather patterns, and all of that, all of the things that the map can tell you, and then the things that it can't tell you. It can't tell you that it's done from this person's perspective, and it's done from a European perspective, or Japanese, or an African perspective. And so, I'm curious to know that, to know how you look at that particular analogy and maybe help your students to empathize with others who might have different perspectives.
I think that empathy is part of what I try to do in going after what you said. Is I have been, as a student, in college classes, and unfortunately when I first started teaching, my classes were like this, where I come to the end of the semester as a student and I look around the room and I'm like, I don't know anybody in here. I know this guy because he sits next to me, and I know her because I borrowed a pencil 3 times because I've, or whatever. But like, I don't know anybody else. Like, we have never been given the opportunity to really do anything together, right? And so one of the things that I'm doing is asking my students, it's very sneaky what I'm doing, but and it's funny because other educators hate icebreakers. And I think we really hate it when administration stole it from activists and started doing it to us. But um, I'm doing it with students as a way to practice how to be in community with each other and how to learn something about each other. And and I'm always emphasizing there's something that you want to change, right? And that may be just a mild thing, like could we fix the Veterans Health Administration, or it could be something big, right? Like you want, ruptural, like revolutionary change. And no matter what it is that you want, the process is generally the same. You got to get with people. You can't just be about the work, because that work has to be rooted in relationships. And and those relationships can be around different things. I mean, the civil rights movement, for example, a lot of those relationships were developed in the church, and what that community meant for them and how that inspired and helped shape that movement, right? But you have to be in relationship with each other, and you have to learn how to speak to each other. And so in their interactions, I often find myself, even if it's something about like, what's your favorite pizza topping? You know, how do you listen generally, or sorry, how do you listen generously to what other people are saying, right? And if it's a more substantive assignment that they're, if we're talking about something more related directly to the course materials, not an icebreaker, and somebody says something in class that you're really disagreeing with at first, to encourage everyone, take a breath. What does this person mean? What values are being reflected here? And you could take what that person said in a way to be like, oh, you're a fascist, or you're an idiot, or whatever. Or you could maybe take it a different way, and you might still disagree, but the person doesn't sound like an idiot. Why not understand it that way? Why not approach it that way? That's more interesting and more enjoyable for everybody. Okay. And you'll find out if they actually meant the really bad one or not. But this practice, I think, because our society is so isolated and atomized, and folks are used to kind of being in their own bubbles, for one thing, students really kind of begin to flourish and sort of come alive. Like they're so enjoying that interaction, because it's in who we are as a species. We are social creatures, and we need to be around each other, and we need to share and go back and forth. And so part of that is just you have to practice it. And when and to read your response, or to like think of your response, and it's easier maybe when you're writing, if it's an online course, than it is in an on-ground setting. But how is this going to sound? Am I jumping on this person and like trying to win the argument like it's a debate? Or is the goal here understanding and building community? And I'm always emphasizing our goal. You're not in competition with anyone in this class, right? This is about how we learn to be together, because whatever you want to do politically, going back to that point about everybody has something they want to change, no matter what you want to do politically, you got to get with people, and you got to be somebody who's worth getting with, right? And
Yeah.
so this has to be practiced. And I don't really know any other way.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant to intentionally practice that, because one of the things I think that drives us to the space that we're in with such division and such um, lack of connection, lack of communication across people's differences is that we are not intentionally instructed or taught in a formal way, let alone and even in our household sometimes, on how to communicate, and particularly communicate across conflict or disagreement, right? So conflict management is something that has to be intentionally addressed. And so every family does that differently. Some families don't talk about conflict, they avoid it, right? Some families lean into it. Some families want everybody to sit around the table and say their piece, and then we're going to figure things out. So that intentionality is really key around building relationships, connecting with people, and fascinating enough. When I did my master's thesis on multiculturalism, because that was the language back then, I used a grounding text written by David Hackett Fisher. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called Albion Seed. And the whole premise of the book is about how the Constitution of the United States is actually no more than a conflict resolution document. And that he talks about the different populations that existed in the colonies at that time and how very different they were and what they had to do to find commonalities across those differences in order to settle on the items that were found in the Constitution. And when we talk about what is that blueprint or that map forward, if we can frame our country not as just one way, not as um, a perfect diagram of this political stance or that political stance, but rather as a a model of how differences can move forward collectively, then we might be able to look at the moment that we're in and say, well, this is nothing more than a lot of differences, and we've got to figure out what our commonalities are, and what better way than to build community and relationship. I know that sounds very idealistic, possibly our listeners, some people might roll their eyes and say, yeah, right. I mean, there some of the very differences are grounded in and you treating me inhumanely. And I get that, right? But it doesn't mean that we don't share things in common. And how do we focus on what we share in common to work through those things that are so, horrible and opposite sometimes for one another? So I think this blueprint or this concept of a map is not even one that we have to um, redesign. We can look at examples of real examples of life, of documents, of treaties, of our Constitution, of certain legislation that's been passed as nothing more than a conflict resolution, of how we take different viewpoints and move them forward. And it's like we're forgetting all that, right? So one of the questions I have is, how do you handle, because I'm sure the populations that you instruct have varying degrees coming into you of knowledge and understanding of the political world or of how their world is a political world, right? Like I have a colleague who also is at a community college who does a survey every year of asking students, where are these issues handled? And most students don't understand that their garbage pickup isn't handled by Washington. Like they don't get where different issues of government and of life take place. So, given that very disparate preparation standard or understanding, how do you or what would you suggest to our listeners in terms of engaging and yet feeling the need to educate people along the way? Like, how do you go about engaging across that difference without becoming someone who's lecturing me, someone who's telling me? Because if people go down that route, sometimes the person who does not know feels like they're being attacked, feels like they're being dismayed or dismissed as an idiot because you think you're smarter than me, right? And you often hear this in this political divide. So what do you suggest for our listeners? How do you handle that disparate understanding and preparedness?
I I really love what you said about the Constitution being a document of conflict resolution. And conflict resolution is this thing that sounds really nice. Um, and yet, as we all know, conflicts do get resolved, but they don't always get resolved in a way that
Right.
is, what we'd like or that isn't harmful and so on. But I really like that approach to it. I think in our culture, and our academic culture is one of this too, because maybe some of us were in debate club, right, in high school or maybe in college, and I always felt a little. It's sort of like when you walk into a heated argument at a party, and I'm the kind of person that's like, can I jump in? I'm like, let's go. But I also feel my heart start to the heart rate increase and I start to feel anxious and on edge because it's clearly a battle. And I think in our general cultural understanding of how do you discuss issues, that framework or that the parameters of a debate are what we think it has to be. And what I have to do in a debate is to win, right? And for myself, what I always encourage everyone is stop trying to win. Take that off the table. There is nothing to win. What there is a relationship to build and grow. If I have a cousin who is racist, all the facts that I can throw at him about racism, I don't think are going to make any difference. And I'm sure a lot of us have had the same experience. Like, wow, I came with all this, dropped all this knowledge, and the dude is still, thinking what he thinks. It didn't mean anything. Which, going back to teaching, that's the way I started teaching. Is this, it's like, from the pedagogy of the oppressed, right? Like it's the banking model. And that doesn't work. And I don't think, maybe my racist uncle or whoever might eventually change their mind, but I think he is much more likely to change his mind if our relationship is strong and he has someone in his life who has a different perspective on this issue, isn't afraid to speak of it, but also doesn't belittle him. And I try to then understand, like, okay, you said this. What's the value there? Like, what is the principle that you think is really important in that? And I get him talking about the principle and the value that's really important to him. And now we're not talking about whether George Soros is cutting checks to Black Lives Matter protesters, right? Now we're talking about something different. Now we're talking about fairness, or now we're talking about, right? And those things, I have all kinds of things in common with him in theory, right? And we can now build off that. Are there some people that you're just like, you know what? I'm going to let you be you, and I got to get out of this room because this is not good for me, right? Somebody like myself, I'm the person I feel that should be having those conversations, right? Someone else maybe shouldn't. But I feel that approach in the long run is going to build more. And if things shift and it looks like we are in this moment where, as Aaron said earlier, alluded to earlier, what happens if we come out of this, whatever this is, and we start to see this shift in humanity, whether that's in our culture, in our political system, or whatever it might be, how that person, my uncle or whoever it is going to relate to that moment. I can help shape that because of how I approached it, because I didn't belittle him or demean him or just barrage him with facts and make him feel stupid. But instead, because we're building this relationship and we're recognizing where we disagree or agree and going from there. And yeah, I just think that's I spent so much time studying this, and I just haven't seen anything else that works.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have to model
I love it.
community if we
We
want to
do.
foster community, right?
Yeah.
We can't model this whole diametrically opposed opinion on everything with everyone unless they exactly agree with you. You're not going to talk to them
That's right.
if we're to move forward. So
That's right.
I agree, and I would just encourage our listeners to lean into the relationship part. Oddly enough, you might really want to read that book, although I do warn people. David Hackett Fisher wrote like 1,000-page book in 8 font. So it's really a hard read. But he actually breaks down very much to what you said, right? Which is like they have to find what he deems their cultural ways. There's 26 of them that cross all cultures, ethnicities, parts of the world. And if we figure out how to communicate to each other about our cultural ways, the way we think about life, the way we think about death, the way we think about the elderly, what we think about education, then we can find some commonality to move forward. But if we just talk about the issue, whatever the issue is, and not break it down to the
Yeah.
core, we're lost. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that. I love all of that. I really love that, Matthew. When you were talking, I thought about that scene in the movie Origin, where she was, called someone over because she had water leaking in her basement, and water was leaking in the basement. And the guy who came over to assess what was going on in the basement, he had on a MAGA hat, you know, and she saw the MAGA hat. And you could tell in the movie, she might have just noticed, had an awareness of the MAGA hat. But what she did was pivoted to talking about her father. If you remember the movie in that scene, she started talking about her father who had passed away or her mother, and then began to ask him about his parents and about his father. And he began talking. And so the way she kind of diffused that whole situation, because at the end of the scene, because he was just going to come in. Here it is, a white man with a MAGA hat. Here is a black woman who needs a. He was just going to come in and write an estimate and say, here it's going to be, $2,000 or whatever, and not even and hardly even talk to her or hardly even engage with her and just do that. But as she began that conversation with him, and really started going into some deep things about your parents, she connected with him on that humane level. Then he began to do further assessments and really did some things for her to help her out with the situation she was dealing with. Right? It's a perfect situation of getting to that rather than just being, hey, he got a MAGA hat on, I'm gonna be this way. Here's a black woman, I'm gonna be this way. And so now I just thought that was an amazing scene, an amazing way in which you talk about, engaging your students. And what I heard too was having a curiosity. That was curiosity, having a curiosity about someone who might think differently, feel differently, ask those questions, and that does it. And Aaron, I'm gonna pass it over to you in a minute. I know you want to ask a question. I couldn't help, Naomi, but think about what you're saying about different cultures and different ways of being. Couldn't help think about as an educator when I taught at one school, right? Where there were different cultural ways, and I intentionally went to another school in Southwest Detroit and taught in a space that was different culture or different people, different culture. And Matthew, like you, when you said you first started teaching, you were going to use that banking model. Hey, I'm the teacher is the center of the classroom and all like that. I was the same way when I began teaching, when I began my teaching career in 1992. I was teaching the way that I was raised. I was teaching the way I was taught. I had all boys, right, for about 4 or 5 years in that school. And so, I had mothers who were coming in and say, hey, do what you need to do, Mr. Murray. They were telling all the men teachers, do what you need to do. He needs some male, influence. He needs this. And so it was kind of a tough and a hard, tough love that we gave when I moved to the academy, right? Because that was all I knew, I came with that. It took me a while to realize I didn't need to do that. And I'm not talking about whether students are good or bad or different. It's just it was a different way of being. And I think if I had not have done that, um I wouldn't have been able to expand my lens of what education looks like for all, and empathy and understanding cultural ways and all like that, and be able to bridge those gaps and have some success at that school as well. So I just wanted to bring that up and kind of affirm what you're saying, particularly about education, particularly in the field of education when you're dealing with children and young people.
Yeah, that sort of dovetails into our next question. We are often told that education institutions, particularly institutions of higher education, are these places that allow these free exchange of ideas and that It's for us to explore how we feel about certain matters, and it's for us to be able to share without judgment. I don't know how effectively it's done that over the past few centuries, but you know, we're often told that that's that's what that space is supposed to be or supposed to facilitate. And recently we've seen this attack on higher education. Um, to a certain degree, I give kudos to Harvard for standing up and saying, we're going to do what we're going to do, but they also have blood on their hands for a number of other other different reasons. But I give kudos to them for saying that we're going to continue to support and allow for the free exchange of ideas without government intervention. I know I'm simplifying that to a certain degree. Um, where other institutions have acquiesced to government pressure, presidential pressure, pressure from, other federal institutions. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, where you might see students in this space for, you have students that might be right leaning and you have students that might be left leaning and you have students that, are somewhere in the middle and some students who just, I don't care. I'm just trying to get through this class and get on to the next step. And so where do you see from your perspective education going when you look at the current um, pressures that are coming from all different directions? Where do you see students going? Where do you see education as a field going when we are existing in the space that we're in?
Oh my goodness. That's a really big question. I love it. And, you know, I do have students who are over here and students who are over here and so on. I was thinking about it's funny. I had this student who was in my class for all of like 2 days, and she was like this anarchist punk, and came in and kind of just sat in the back like this. Came in the second day and said, "You seem kind of cool, so here." And she gave me this anarchist zine about how education is actually just bananas and a tool of the capitalist oppressors and so on. And I'm like, oh, cool, thank you so much, and then she left and never came back. I'm like, oh man, I would have liked to have had your voice in here, like, this. It was the oddest thing, and I think about that student so often. But going back to reflecting something that Naomi was mentioning earlier, I think part of one way to address those ideological differences is to not make it about the person and make it about the idea. And going back again to the principles and values, someone might say something, and instead of saying, oh, you're a conservative or you're MAGA or whatever the word we might use now, often in a pejorative way, that sounds like a traditionally conservative idea, right? Suddenly you've taken it away from that person. And now it's something that's on the table between the two of you that you can now discuss and understand, right? And I'm constantly stressing that with students to try to avoid, the labeling of a person, and instead, let's even not label, let's try to understand that idea. And again, the principles and the values behind it. In terms of where education is going, I see it, I don't know. The amount of times I've been wrong about what's coming, it's too many to count. But I feel like education, as long as our current systems and structures remain in place, is going to continue to fragment and break apart. We now have COVID, of course, made this or accelerated this process, but the process was beginning before that, where you're seeing this exodus from public schools and charter schools, home schools, private schools, whatever people can do. And that's a very complex process, and people are doing that for many complex reasons, right? It's not always I think a lot of folks maybe who are more in line with Democrats or liberals or progressives might feel like the reason that that's happening is because you're afraid of these progressive ideas that are being shared. And for some people, yes, that's why they're doing it. But for others, they're doing it for different reasons, right? And but I feel that particularly as long as the purpose of education seems to be job placement and job training. How does my child develop the skills that she will need in order to take her role in this global economy, right? And succeed in the global economy. That's not what I thought education was. And this is one of the things that I continue to struggle with, because schools are very often talking about, intellectual development, and teachers in particular. A lot of us, unless you're in something like a nursing program or a welding program at a community college where, we're trying to get these students placed into jobs. And that's understandable. For a lot of us who are teaching other things, we're thinking about intellectual development, right? And I'm kind of not caring if my students get a job or not. I'm caring more about, do you understand this material, and can you think about it thoughtfully, critically, generously, and so on? That's a very different thing. That's a very different understanding of education than where it fits in the material economic conditions and concerns of the people, right? And every one of my students is there for their future economic role and trying to make that as good and as positive as possible for themselves. And I think a lot of teachers are struggling with that. And I don't see that going anywhere. I think there was a time, and maybe this depends on the institution, where that emphasis on intellectual development for its own sake, as a basic inherent aspect of humanity, right? I want to grow my mind. I want to grow my soul. And learning and reading and thinking critically about this and hearing the perspectives of others, this is going to help me be a more well-rounded, compassionate, intelligent, in the best sense of the word, human being. Not, do I get into pharmacy tech or do I get into this because where's the market going to be and what are the wages going to be, right? And I think that contradiction, that tension, is driving a lot of this, right? I didn't send my kid to school so that you could tell him that George Washington was, enslaved people and broke the law or got around the law while he was president.
Right.
Not all my kids there, right? Or whatever other, fill in your favorite, boogeyman that they're, whatever teachers are doing, right? And so I think a lot, they're there to learn the skills that they need to learn so that they can get into the job market. And I think as long as that's the emphasis and the expectation, I see the education system continuing to fragment. It's particularly because I don't think we have so much of how we discuss political issues is in this binary of what do the Democrats think and what do the Republicans think. And there are a lot of people who call themselves Republicans who actually don't agree with what the Republicans want to do, and the same with Democrats. And so there's this complexity there. But you see the Democratic Party, for example, move from a party that was very much in favor of public education to now one that is embracing, a phrase that comes up again and again is the public-private partnership, or how do we mobilize the resources of the private sector to, make education better. And as long as I think that trend continues and that push continues from both parties, that those parameters, we're going forward within those parameters as long as that remains the case. And I think we're going to see the continued fragmentation of education. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. because I'm looking at this from a
Ooh,
community college perspective. I'd love to hear what you guys think.
I mean, I have lots of thoughts when you were talking because I don't disagree, but I often wonder, and I will try to not go too broad, right? But I often wonder if um, it was designed to eventually fragment. And let me say more about that. It was originally designed, right, the horseman model, to not produce philosophers. It was to produce workers, right? It was produce and to weed out those who were bright enough, intelligent enough to go on and possibly be the thinkers of the world. But honestly, the basic measure of education was to stay until you were 16, because 16 was the golden work age, right? Like we've got this going on, and then it became somehow popularized that in order to get a higher paying job, you also had to have higher degrees. And so colleges became incredibly important as a status accomplishment in order to attain higher paying jobs. But it but uh, I'm trying to be succinct here, but that was never sold to the general American public as a way to become more philosophical, to really dig into the humanities, to understand our human condition and how we relate to and live in community and relationship with other people. Education in this country has never been sold as a means to enrichen the soul, mind, and body. It has only ever been sold as a way to get more money. So college's only function was to get more money. So the pushback that I hear is because now all of these kids graduate from college, four-year colleges, community, with no jobs, not making money, and causing their parents a lot of increased debt. Like, my paid for all this college and my kids aren't getting jobs. And so the attack made sense to me that the promise of getting a job at the end of the college degree wasn't happening. We've got to dismantle this stuff. And we're going to blame it, of course, on this idea that you've co-opted the work experience of education into just a learning and philosophical experience of education, right? Because if you think about the world around, right? And I'll give you a very concrete example. My mother is she's 87 years old. So generationally in the 50s in Lebanon, women did not go to school. They learned a some type of function, right? Like a seamstress or something like that, work in a kitchen in order to be productive and have a role in a job like that. Okay. The idea of education to get um, college, high school and college and beyond was to only develop those who would be behind policy and the thinkers. It wasn't even to get a job. So even boys often in the high school were tracked into different careers, right? They weren't tracked into going into college, and we had a much more robust workforce, and education was saying something of the elite, right? And I'm not saying that that's where we need to go, but I feel like that's where we're headed because, again, they sold college here as a way to get a higher paying job that did not pan out for the majority. And so now they're like, well, that's not working. We don't care that they're becoming deep thinkers. We don't need deep thinkers. We're lacking workers. Let's dismantle it and make it back to work. So I agree with you that it's going to continue to fragment because, like many other things, much like Brown versus Board of Education, we make a decision, but really don't prep the society for the implications of that decision. So Brown versus Board of Education did integration without any preparation for integration, which by design would happen to cause the further split around racism that it caused, right? And scapegoat those people who are now benefiting from the system. And so I feel like education has done the same thing. It's scapegoating those really interested in growing the mind and spirit because that's what we signed up to do, right? Because the country was never transitioned to that mindset and was only sold this bill of goods that it was going to get somebody a better job.
Absolutely. I agree with all of that. And I feel also that a lot of that intellectual development that I was speaking of and growing your mind and your soul, I hear from a lot of teachers, right? And that's where I think, so I think that I'm reflecting more of that. I haven't heard, the Secretary of Education, will go give a commencement address and to a community college and say, you guys are going to be competing with the workers of China so that we can, win in this global race of blah, blah, blah. And, that they're selling it as this is,
Jobs.
yeah, this is jobs and it's part of our economic model and our ideological battle with, and so absolutely. I don't, that's the thing. I feel that job training or career or something is actually a really, what are you really talking about there? You're talking about the work that you want to do with your life, right? The work that you want to do with your life. And so many of my students, will talk about, we'll have assignments or discussions around what are the jobs that have the greatest social value? What are the jobs that have the least social value? Right? Are there any jobs that are actually harmful? Like, oh, what do you do? I'm a marketing executive for a soft drink company and I try to get more children to drink Coca-Cola.
Right.
Okay. That's a job. Good for you. And it's a well-paying job and you're providing well for your family, but this is also your job, right? It's harmful. And so many students, they want to do something that has purpose. They want to do something that has meaning. Um, and I mean, some of them are just like, I'm just trying to get paid, sure. But I think you have that idealism isn't really the word that I want to use, but I think that's there. And I think there's a way to understand this for me without just making it's only about the job or it's got to be about intellectual development, right? I think if I am compassionate and I'm learning about different perspectives and I'm taking the time to understand where other people are coming from, wherever I am, that's going to make me a good person to be in community with,
Absolutely.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, we all get it because we all buy into that, right? But
Yeah.
was that sold to the American public that way?
No, definitely not.
Absolutely not.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
And the history that you speak of
Yeah.
is remarkable and a little like, ugh.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And particularly from the education perspective, because it was never meant to equalize
Right.
society. And so from from people who are in it, they're like, it's still not doing it, but it's doing a better job at doing that. And from others looking from the outside, like people are getting way too many, freedoms or opportunities, and you can't control a people who, one, know their history, who are free thinkers, who develop their own perspectives, who have professors such as yourself
Hmm.
who um, you know, uh, catalyze that sort of thinking. Like, I'm sure you don't tell them what to think, but you help people to express themselves through their own thinking process. And so, this current iteration um, doesn't want to see that. And I think the attack on not just higher schools of institutions of higher education, but K through 12 schools is looking to go back to that model that Naomi was talking about a few minutes ago, and the model that Freire talks about is
Right.
the banking model. Like, we are all supposed to do a certain thing, and that serves the purpose of not society, but that serves the purpose of those who benefit from what society can offer. And so I appreciate your thoughts on that, and how um, professors or those who are teachers can look to, in their, I don't want to say small way because I don't want to minimize it, but in their own way, can begin to or continue to push students to Yes, we all have to earn a living. We all have to put food on the table. We all have to have a roof over our heads, and we can use those skills and talents to move something forward for the rest of humanity.
I feel like that I was reminded, going back to what I had said earlier about these things that happened and that you knew about, and then you kind of forget it because you're focused on other things. But I thought about the public education system, the university system in California, and Ronald Reagan is governor of California and is seeing this really incredible principled and radical activism among college students, and is like, oh, hell no. we,
Yes,
we, we're not paying for this.
right,
That's
right.
not what it's supposed to be. This person's talking, and I think that there's that moment of like, oh, I can change my own life. I can enter school and I can be at this point, and then I can get this knowledge and this experience, and I can be at another point. And it doesn't take long before a student says, oh, I can change myself. What if we can change what's around us? Because I see a lot of, and particularly in a public education system like that, that was open and that for the first time, like brought in so many students into the university system that, the previous generation maybe hadn't had access to, or at least at that level. And now it's just on, right? And there's all of this activism and agitation. And for Reagan and for people like him, like that's not what the school is supposed to be for. Like, school is now an active threat to our way of life,
Right.
and something has to be done about that.
Yeah, I think they didn't think out the unintended consequences of education systems, and free thinking, right? Like they meaning those who really want it to be just a workforce preparation field. And there's value in that. Aaron and I spent the week working with a lot of young people, and I talked to some of them who were like, I wish education gave us like this base. We all get this base of basic math and basic reading, and then we get to pick what we're interested in, because I don't want this generalized education. And it's very interesting that even the young people are speaking in those terms because of of how we've painted, talked about education, and we have not valued education and intelligent, growth. We have not valued that as a society. And so kids themselves are seeing learning about other things as a waste of time. Now, I'm not saying we can't do a combination. I think we absolutely can teach some skills and careers embedded with humanities, right? That would be the sweet spot. But um, again, the binary has reared its ugly head in terms of how education's talked about versus how it actually plays out for people. So, um, yeah, this this could be like 5 podcasts of a
Yeah, no,
conversation,
no
right?
doubt.
Like
No
this
doubt.
topic alone, right? Yeah.
No,
I
no,
want
no.
to I want to quickly interject and ask you all something. I
Yeah,
have a dog that is part pit bull and part husky,
yeah.
and you'll get my point in a second. If you know anything about huskies, they're very vocal, and mine right now is screaming at me to be let out, and I'm not going to be able to say anything anymore if I don't let her out. So it'll just take me like 10 seconds. I just got to
Yeah,
let her
yeah,
out the
yeah,
door. Okay,
yeah,
I'll be
yeah,
right
yeah,
back.
yeah,
Thanks.
yeah,
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, this concept
yeah.
of education.
Oh,
As a work development, and I'm just about, well, then let's embrace it what it is. Let's like embrace things for what they are, name them for what they are, and there would be less
yeah,
need to fight about what they should be,
yeah,
because let it be what they
yeah,
want it to be, and then
yeah,
create something else
yeah,
that's for something else, right? So Europe used to have an educational system that you go to eighth grade, everybody gets the same thing all the way up into eighth grade. But going after eighth grade, you decide if you want to go to a certain career path or if you want to go to college prep. And if you're going to college prep, it's to study philosophies or language or
mm,
policy like that. It's not to actually get a career, right?
yeah,
Like you would become a professor or you would get some kind of bureaucratic job. Other than that, you went through the career path. And they had a much more well-rounded populace. But their career paths too were full of what we call general education around
Mm,
humanities.
yes.
And then in 1992, 93, they started shifting to our model. And since then, they've created a lot of the same problems in their societies that we have. So it's a real
Yeah.
fascinating
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not impossible to
Yeah.
have career path and college path existing, both having humanity embedded in them, but allowing kids to kind of guide themselves as to where they want to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of Matthew, we're going to say something?
I I wanted to go back to something Naomi had said
Yeah.
earlier and put this to all of you because I've been thinking a lot about this and I'm still trying to put my head together around it. But Naomi, you talked about, wanting to get a job and then you get the job, but or maybe the job isn't there or it's not paying what you hoped it would, and all of the ways that we're seeing. I think a lot of the frustration that we're seeing in the country across the board has to do with there was this general promise or this general, like, kind of social contract that said if you do this, this, and this,
Mm,
you're going to be all right. And we're not all right. And um, that's one of the things I think that to me makes this stepping back a really interesting time, because understanding history and how these contradictions and tensions just, you
mm,
know, what is this going to mean for how we go forward? And it could be great. It could also be really awful. From my perspective, what we're seeing now is trending toward the awful. Um, but I think that that broken promise, and obviously that promise was not the same for everybody. It was only meant to apply to a certain group of people and so on. And that's not unimportant, but it's the fact of the matter is that even for those people that it was intended to, that promise was to be kept for, it's not being kept.
mm,
And seeing education in that, I think, like, did you speak to it earlier as like education is being scapegoated for that?
mhm.
Do you think that it's that education can't prepare people for what the world is now? Or is it the systems and structures are not capable or maybe not interested in delivering on that promise anymore? What are
I
your
think
thoughts?
it might be a both and, honestly, Matthew, and everyone's who hears this will laugh because I think both and is going to go on my gravestone. Um, but I do believe that
Yeah.
education as currently structured cannot deliver on that promise for anyone. It's never delivered on that promise for most black and brown people in this country, right? And so, to your point, though, it's also now not promising for middle and low class white people either, which is where the everything starts to explode, right? Because I still hear now, back in the day, you could graduate high school and find a job and or a family could live on one income, even if it were in high school. Maybe it was a college degree, but families could live on one income. It is nearly impossible now for families to live on one income ever, like unless you're in the upper echelon. So upper middle class, lower, like they're all impossible classes to exist in if without, multiple jobs. I don't believe that our efforts are well spent trying to save a system that was never designed to deliver on that promise for all of us. I would rather have all of our efforts go for building what we actually need, right? So maybe we look at this opportunity, this challenge that we're all encountering as an opportunity. We missed the opportunity with COVID. Could we take advantage of it now? Right? Could we build the educational systems that we need? Can we provide to our youth and our country what it actually wants and needs? And what does that look like, right? It doesn't have to be one size fits all for everyone. We know it never does fit all. So why even chase that? Um, so yeah, I do think that it could be a both and
Yeah.
answer that we are not able to fulfill it and current structures have to change.
Yeah, I believe that too. The current structures are what they are, and they're all screwed. And I do believe in Matthew. You're talking about the other part, education for liberation. I do believe in that, and I believe that's possible. And that would look totally different. Um, I wanna pivot for a while to another segment, Matthew. We because this is when you talk about all this. I mean, it fits into with what's going on today, what people are feeling today, and we like to really invite our listeners to really, or we want to hear from them about what they're experiencing, how they're feeling, what's going on, and it'll help us to really filter out even what we feel or how to respond to them when they make those comments. So we have a segment where people have recorded some things, and we want to get into that. We want to listen to what people are saying, right? We want to listen to the audience, and what we found, Matthew, is people want to have a voice. They want to have moments to give voice to uh, what's going on with them, what they're feeling, and to hold space for them. So we have some people, some dear people who are going to have recorded a message, and we'll start that, and then we'll comment on that and go to the next one. And it's some dear people, and we know who they are, but certainly you don't yet. And so we'll play them, and we'll go with that.
And our general question or prompt to them was, why does it all matter? Like, why should we care? Why should
Yeah.
we care what's happening domestically? Why should we care what's happening internationally? Why does it matter to us? And I think a number of them took a liberty of answering this question about why it matters, why paying attention to what's happening in Ukraine and Palestine and all over the world matters to us. And so first we're going to hear from our dear friend Erica.
Thank you for asking me to
Are you hearing that?
my thoughts are
It's a little
about
low.
why we should care about what's happening in Israel and Palestine. And for context, I am a Black woman, and so I've seen the injustice within that's put towards our communities. You know, the pain, the injustice, being treated as inhuman. I see that. I get that. So I also get why so many people say within our communities that we can't necessarily hold the space for others because we need to be working within our own communities and solving those injustices, which I understand, but it's not going to get to the root of before we release all selfishness, all greed, all fear, and pretend that it's okay for some to be fed while others are not fed, pretend that it's okay for some to be seen as human while others are seen as human, as inhuman, for some people to be treated with dignity and others not treated with dignity. Until we get to the root of that thing right there, we're going to see the same injustices repeated time and time again, whether it's here, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's wherever. So my thought is allowing ourselves to be open and be willing to see all of us as humanity, because when we see that, then there is real love, compassion, and justice for everyone.
Mm. Man, I'm gonna go upstairs and hug my wife, man. My wife, that's Eric. That's Eric. Hey, listen, y'all. Erica had 90 seconds to do that.
She
She put
packed
on.
it in, man.
She packed it
She
in
said a
for for
mouthful
for,
right
for
there.
90 seconds. And I can tell you, Matthew, when I listen to that, I think about what you were saying, what we were talking about this binary, right? This binary, even in education, I mean, the thread flows through everything. Seeing, how can what's happening to one community and that's not being addressed, and so we can't care about what's happening to another community. You know what I mean? This retreat back into our silos, which trauma can do as well, but it's not desirable. It's not what's going to heal the planet.
It's
It's
why I'm
not
your
what's.
both and girl. See, it can't be
Yeah,
either
yeah,
or.
both and yeah, we're
Either
both
or
and
doesn't
too.
work. I'm the
We're
both
both
and.
and yeah, we're both and people over here. We're both and people, and that takes, yeah, that takes, even as an educator, Matthew, I mean, that takes the decentering of yourself. When you talked about in that classroom, what you evolved to is where we centered ourselves in our learning, but then we decenter ourselves, and the learning is created by those in the classroom. So, and then the same thing takes place in this, I think, with communities, that people to decenter ourselves. So I love what she's saying, so we all can hold space for one another, you know.
Aaron, are you jumping in?
Uh, I was about to, but I'm just sitting with it for a moment.
Yeah.
Um, to decenter ourselves, and I've said it on a number of occasions. I even talk about it to educators about prioritizing the needs of others, and I do it less so in practice. And
Mm,
so hearing her voice, Spencer, and hearing your voice around that topic just selfishly for me makes me think about how we can, not that we mute our voices, but how do we, I did this training some years ago, and it was about the International Baccalaureate, and it basically said that two people can be right at the same time. And I hadn't
mm,
considered that before. You know what I'm
mm,
saying? I hadn't considered that before that. And
mm.
so that hearing her perspective and hearing you how you talk about that just brings that back up for me.
Yeah.
That when
Yeah.
we decenter ourselves, we understand that two people can be right. And going back
Yes.
to what Matthew said earlier, it may not be even a question of right or wrong, but
Exactly.
um, that two perspectives can be valid. Maybe I'll
Hmm.
put it that way. Two
Hmm.
perspectives can be valid
Yes.
simultaneously.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mother years ago taught me that never fixate on your own reality too much,
Mm,
and always remember that there are people who have it better than you, and there are people who don't have it as good as you.
hmm.
And if you can remember that like whole picture instead of just your reality. It
Hmm.
gives a perspective. So, to all of us who are in marginalized communities here, whether that's immigrants, whether that's Black people, whether that's Arab people, like LGBTQ people, I want us all to remember that as well. There are people in this entire planet that we're all connected. They have it a lot
Hmm.
better than us, but also have it a lot worse than
Hmm.
us. So we have to get away from that urge to play that, like, I always say the oppression Olympics and figure
Yeah.
out who and
Exactly.
just focus on our pain.
Yeah.
Yes, we have to build up our communities, but not at the expense of allowing other communities to be torn down.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. So I want to introduce this next to Naomi because Matthew, I'll see if you recognize this voice of this next gentleman coming in. I'll let you listen to it first, and then if you don't, I'll tell you who it is. But I haven't listened to it yet, but I certainly want to hear his thoughts. So he is a another profound brother.
All right, here we go.
Oh,
it feels like people have become so callous. Um, we have our social discourse has been given over in large part to algorithms that bifurcate our thought and sequester us into these silos where all we do is hear echoes of our own minds, and it has this way of hardening us and turning us off to opinions and ways of seeing the world that aren't our own, and then it gets amplified by people with this keyboard courage that come into these spaces with what seems to be the sole purpose of causing ruckus and causing chaos and strife, where they're just there to stir the pot, and it's hardened us to one another, to and it's removed, and it's eroding our sense of empathy towards each other. So spaces like this, I think, are important for us to actively be engaged in holding on to our own humanity and talking to each other, hearing each other's voices, seeing each other's faces in ideal situations where we're able to connect on a human level and support and push and hold up and move forward with each other and be able to have disagreements and share our thoughts and have those disagreements in a way that ultimately, hopefully, elevate us all. Being able to own the fact that you might be wrong, and being open to the idea of growing from a different perspective. That's important for us as people, as humans, to be able to um, continue to evolve, continue to become ideally the altruistic selves that I like to believe um, we all aspire to be. Um, but we need communities like this where we can have dialogue, where we can have conversations, and feel safe in doing so.
Mm. Man, listen,
Very well
yeah,
said.
yeah, man, you all comment on this. I just want to say this. I am so, man, I'm having a moment here because Wayne and Matthew stood up in my wedding. They were both, you know what I mean? And so it's a moment of pride for me, man. It's a moment. I
You're like,
just
I've
feel
got
like
cool people in my
these
life.
are cool. These are people. But yeah, he's spot on, y'all. Comments. Oh, comments. I'm
Don't
so
all jump in
oh,
at once,
I don't
right?
all
Yes.
jump in at one time. Well, I'm just gonna put down when he said keyboard courage. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That people are just having this keyboard courage and it's still keeping us at arm's length from one another.
Yeah. I think that's there are, you can look at so many different aspects of technology and its cultural impact, and um, where you can see positive aspects and you can see other aspects that are just like, ah, man, this whole, like, the digital town hall is just not working out the way
Yeah.
everybody said it would, right? I mean, and it can, right? That's the thing about it, is that most of my social media, I have worked really, really hard to curate, and they still keep putting stuff in that is like, man, come on.
Mhm.
Um, Tried really hard to shape that so that it is a positive experience for me. Where, like, I'm interested in this. I'm interested in what this person has to say. I've
Right.
got, I see what Spence is doing. I see this, and that, where it can be something, but like he said, it's you've got these people coming in, and it's like this drive by, or like, I'm just here to cause this. I'm going to drop this big bag of ugly in the middle of this and then sit back and watch.
Yeah.
And it's or it's a very aggressive, kind of challenging just for its own sake, as opposed to any real
Yeah.
genuine interest in engaging, right?
Exactly.
And that's a tough one. And I think, yeah, the more removed we are from each other,
Yeah.
the easier it is to get into
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
The
And the
solution.
easier, yeah, and the
Yeah.
easier it is to make sure that we just become pawns in the game rather than owners of our own kind of like pathway and destiny, right? So, read an article the other day and it reminded me of what he's saying. A study finally has come out about the neurological impacts of using AI, such as ChatGPT, in generating
Mm.
writing. And they did this great study. I'll have to figure it out, find it and send it to you guys because Aaron, I know you would be really fascinated with this. But how the brain, did you see this one, this study? So
No, I
the
didn't.
brain actual function decreases if people are using Chat GTP for a certain amount of time. And then when it's pulled from them, they're no longer able to formulate sentences that they used to
Wow.
be able to write independently. And so, how are we also not only just connecting with each other, but connecting so much with the technology that it really is leading to our full dehumanization so
Yeah.
that we will not be in community, right? It is a
Yeah.
tool. I
Yeah.
think technology can be incredibly powerful, but if we use it, again, much like these other things, um, at the cost of, then it becomes our own demise, right? And I think of shows or based on books, right, like The Handmaid's Tale. The revolution comes at the hands of people connecting with people and people
Yes.
planning old-fashioned ways to overthrow, right, the regime,
Yeah.
not using AI and technology to connect because they realize that it's the person-to-person network that's really going to topple the regime, not anything else. So I think there's a lot to be said in Wayne's comments.
That makes sense.
I was thinking about like I don't know if the original purpose of social media was to get people together, but that's essentially what we used it for in the beginning. Like just to connect with people across the world or connect with your friends, on Facebook and hey, let's post these pictures and see what everybody's doing and let's keep in touch and all of this. And it seemingly had these um, you know, altruistic is too strong of a word, but it seemingly had these, sort of good purposes, and then quickly turned into what we have now. And I think about like how AI, can only has to be, introduced to the internet for like a couple of minutes before it becomes racist, before it becomes misogynistic, before it becomes anti-LGBTQ, like only a couple of minutes. And so to that point, um, you know, tapping back into our humanity and using it for the purposes of connecting rather than disconnecting or disconnecting from it altogether and finding different ways to um, be in community with another human being. Like put your phone down for 30 minutes. Like put your phone down. If you're sitting at dinner, like have a real conversation. Or if you are having a disagreement or, and it doesn't have to be disagreeable, but you can, if you're having a disagreement with another human being, it's common among human beings. I mean,
Right.
we all have significant others. Like we don't live in harmony 24/7. Like we're gonna we're gonna
Mm.
disagree, we're gonna
Yeah.
have disputes, and we come back together because we love each other and we say, "Hey, I'm sorry. I if I hurt you, how can I make it right?" That sort of thing. And so taking that that philosophy and spreading it to others, I think would do us some real good.
Yeah, I'm going to be like that anarchist student of yours, Matthew, and say, was it really launched just for relationship development, or was it laying the groundwork for what is happening
That
and
part,
what's about to come, right?
that part.
And I don't, I mean, I am always like thinking this way. This is how my mind works, but I do believe that we have to be a little bit more leery. I don't believe technology is bad. I do believe that things advance and change. And if we were to say we should never engage in it, then we would still be doing everything by hand and not driving cars and et cetera, right? But um, we cannot lose each other. And if we allow technology to speed up, the divorcing of each other, of people from each other's lives, then it's a problem for sure.
Yeah.
I feel like that has a lot to do with, I don't want to stray too far away from what Wayne had said, but I think that one of the things that I struggle with, not just with my students, but everything, where, one of my students mentioned, well, now that AI is here, things are going to change and be this. And I was like, what do you mean now that AI is here?
Mm.
That this is not we had some bad wins and now suddenly,
Yeah.
what Naomi said about that study, looking at our cognitive, abilities, that this was something that was developed intentionally and for in large part as a labor saving, or not the idea of a labor saving, like we don't need to pay people to do this anymore. We can have this do it. Or maybe we still have the person, but we don't have to pay them as much, or we don't need as many of them because now we have this tool. Automation is another really important thing, because I would hear people always say, like, well, now that automation happened, and I'm like, automation didn't happen. It was developed by businesses with the military, because that whole process had to be publicly funded, because there was no way that business could afford all the research and development that went into that. So they got the military to do it for them, and it was with the express purpose. The government understood this and business understood it, that we need to de-skill skilled labor and reduce their power in the workplace. Now, if you're in an auto factory, and now painting the car is automated, that's actually a good thing, because that was really deadly, unhealthy work, right? Like it's not an altogether bad thing. Like something can be introduced and there can be a positive impact of it, just like with cell phone or whatever. But remembering this is not just something that happened, right? And I think that's where part of how we understand politics and society in general is so difficult, because a lot of us don't understand, or we forget. It's kind of like taking a media literacy, the principles of media literacy, one of which is somebody created this message and somebody created it for a specific purpose. And we have forgotten that with things like automation or AI, and also forgetting not only that somebody created it, but that the people who did create it have very particular agendas and purposes and desires, and it reflects a power structure. And once you start to understand all that, I mean, to me, that's not, someone is like, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. And it's like, no, that's, if you understand how institutions work and that what certain institutions are for, of course, that's why it was done, or that was,
Right.
And
we got to teach people to connect the dots.
Completely. And
it's the map you're talking about.
What's ironic to me about it is we're coming out of this understanding, I thought, about climate, energy, pollution, and so on. AI is the amount of energy it requires is
mind-boggling.
To me, it's not even, it's mind-boggling, but it's also, it's the word I keep coming to is grotesque.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we understand what's happening. We understand that there has to be a fundamental shift to, from what we're doing now to something else. And here comes the new industry, the big new industry. And man, it is like exploding. And, it is so aggravating that problem rather than fixing it. It's just, it's striking. It's really striking. I get a lot of anxiety about things like this. You talked at the beginning, like, how are you doing? And there are times when you're just like, oh man, I can't process this. It's too much.
Yeah. I get anxiety when I think about the generations to come, but because a lot of this will happen beyond us, right? Like the next generations really will see all the impacts of these decisions being made right now. All right, should we hear from our next?
Yes, we got another voice coming in, my sister's voice, and let's play it. Maybe you recognize it, Matthew. Let's do it.
Happy Sunday, Hermano Spencer, and the other soul family who participate in this important podcast, Endless Evolution. This is Adela Nieves Martinez. I am partner of Matthew Cross and mama of our child. I am also ceremonial leader, or tequina, of a tribe called Tribu Yuque, based in Borique, also known as Puerto Rico. I'm sitting on a mountain in a rainstorm thinking about all of you, starting with Matthew, and my deep gratitude for this long journey we've been on, your ability to listen deeply, to be present, with me and our child from the heart, and to not only love our family, but love the collective. Thank you for showing the way. And to everyone else who's participating on this podcast, I share my gratitude for you too, for opening your hearts, for knowing that without you, there is no us. Knowing that what happens where you are is important across the world. Knowing that the seeds you plant and the energy that you share models for others, and others model for others, and others model for others. And before you know it, that energy is across the world. Not us without you, not you without us. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you for, like Matthew, showing the way. And know that you always have a home in Boricua. Han Han Katu.
Man.
I'll be on the next flight.
Yeah, we felt that, man. We felt that.
Beautiful.
That's man. My sister, and let me say, she stood up in her wedding too.
This is just the wedding episode of
Dude, I mean,
Spencer.
it just
That's what I'm going to
came
title
down.
it when I
It
publish
just came
it.
down like that. It just came
The
down like
Spencer
that.
wedding party.
Really, man. These are the people that recorded. I asked, I was like, "But they just happened."
The Murray wedding party. That's what
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was.
yeah. But um, Matthew, any words? I know you felt that too.
Yeah, deeply. I feel and have felt, I think, for a lot of my life, a frustration with that, with part of what Adela said
Mm,
around the power that we have and
mhm,
how we relate to one another and what we model for other people. Because I'm focused so much on the larger things, um, the war, this poverty, and so on, and um, that it's very easy for me to forget what a core foundational truth that is.
mhm.
And all of us get pulled away from that for some reason or other. And sometimes it's understandable given what everyone is facing, and some people more than others. But so grateful to again and again be reintroduced to that core truth, like that starts someplace.
Yeah.
And it actually, she had said something another day, and the Rabbi Hillel quote, I'm sure you
Mm,
guys know this: if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm not for
mm,
someone else, then who am I? And if not now, when? Um, that I see that fitting so beautifully with that.
mm.
Um, and yeah.
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 Well, thank you. Or that message and what you said reminded me too, because, and I'm sure it's the same for Aaron and his partner. I'm sure it's the same for Naomi, her partner. Is that I can get bogged down because this big picture of I can save the world and the work I do, and then there's times when I have to really sit and be present and just sit in the joy with me and Erica. Just sit in that joy
Yeah.
and be present with it and be surrounded by it and be uplifted by it, and when I can do that, and for me it takes work sometimes because I have this, this big thing I'm going to do, this big thing taking, but just be present with that. And so I appreciate her message because it reminded me of that joy as
Mm.
well. That's sitting right there with me. That's right here with me.
And just think of all the good that we do, putting that our joy,
Yeah,
those vibrations into the world's energy, right?
yeah,
Like if all we're doing is worrying about all the bad things that are happening,
yeah,
all we're doing is replicating more bad energy into
yeah,
the
yeah. That's right.
into the universe, right?
That's right.
So staying in that joy is an act
Yeah,
of kindness for humanity, right? And it is an act.
Yeah.
It's not for me resistance. It's about creation. It's about
Yeah.
creating
Yeah.
the reality that we want.
Yeah. 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 Well, there's one,
One
Aaron, were
more.
you going to say something? There's one more voice we're going to bring in, and I think it's great to close out with this one. Aaron, anything else?
No, go for it. Go
All
Okay.
for it.
right, let's listen. This is Nona.
This message is for Matthew. Thank you for everything, Papa. I love you.
And we echo her sentiments,
We echo
Matthew.
our sentiments. Man,
Oh,
what a way to end. What a way.
it is.
What a way. What a way. And what
I
a
love you too,
joy.
Amor.
Yeah, and to be reminded of that. And
Yes.
we weren't trying to make you cry, Matthew. We weren't trying to do that, man. But listen, that's it. And I think what a great way to wrap it up with
Yeah,
the
thank you
joy.
so much,
With that
Matthew,
joy.
for spending
Thank
this time
you.
with us.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
Aaron's going to wrap up a lot of the sentiments we have with this
Yeah.
quote.
Yes.
And then we can say our goodbyes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Matthew, for your time. And thank you to Spencer and Naomi for just being awesome partners in this work. And so this quote is from Audre Lorde, and she says, "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. Racism and homophobia are real conditions of our lives in this place and time. I urge each one of us here to reach down in that deep place of knowledge inside herself and touch that terror and loathing of any difference that lives here. See whose face it wears. Then the personal, as the political, can begin to illuminate all our choices."
Mm,
We ask
that's
our
powerful.
listeners to continue to live in those spaces and in those understandings. And as always, we end on a positive note. We end our show on a positive note, something you can take with you. And so with that quote, I turn it over to Spencer
Thank you, thank you.
to take us home.
Well, this is certainly intended to be positive, and hopefully it helps us to have empathy for everybody who's experiencing whatever they're experiencing in the world. And I was moved to find this quote by Martin Luther King. It says, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice. Anywhere, everywhere. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And so, with that, we care about what happens to people all around the world, right? Knowing that we're all connected. And so, until next time, stay balanced, keep healing, and keep evolving. Peace and love.
Peace and love, everyone.
Peace and love.
Peace, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Matthew.
you.
This episode of Endless Evolution is brought to you by the No Harm Organization, uplifting wholeness and humanity. Our featured music is Humanity by Lava La Rue.